And today, a federal judge pointed to the Epstein files when the judge rejected the Trump Justice Department request to release the grand jury transcripts in the investigation of Jeffrey Epstein. The judge made it clear that the grand jury transcripts do not include any witnesses other than an FBI agent who summarized the information that they had obtained from witnesses and documents in their investigation of the case. That was enough to get an indictment of Jeffrey Epstein for his sex trafficking and raping children. Today, in his decision, Judge Richard Berman wrote, "A significant and compelling reason to reject the government's position in this litigation is that the government has already undertaken a comprehensive investigation into the Epstein case and, not surprisingly, has assembled a trove of Epstein documents, interviews, and exhibits, and the government committed that it would share its Epstein investigation materials with the public. The government's 100,000 pages of Epstein files and materials dwarf the 70-odd pages of Epstein grand jury materials. The government is the logical party to make comprehensive disclosure to the public of the Epstein files. By comparison, the grand jury motion appears to be a diversion from the breadth and scope of the Epstein files in the government's possession." And so there is a federal judge saying in writing today that the legal maneuver that Donald Trump personally announced on social media of asking for the release of the grand jury testimony was nothing but, in the judge's words, a diversion from the breadth and scope of the Epstein files. That's what we said it was on this program the night Donald Trump said that they should release the grand jury transcripts. We said that was just a Trump diversion. Tonight, a federal judge has found that Donald Trump and his attorney general were just playing their diversion game by asking for the grand jury transcripts. That is exactly how we labeled that request for the grand jury transcripts that very night when Donald Trump announced it. The judge wrote, "In February 2025, the government, as noted, was prepared to release their Epstein files to the public. But then, on July 6, 2025, the government announced it would not make the files available to the public. The information contained in the Epstein grand jury transcripts pales in comparison to the Epstein investigation information and materials in the hands of the Department of Justice." The judge wrote about something that Donald Trump and the Attorney General obviously care nothing about, because the Justice Department made no effort to even consult with Jeffrey Epstein's victims before requesting the release of the grand jury transcripts. And it is required by law that they consult with those victims before asking to release the grand jury transcripts. And Donald Trump's Justice Department did not do that. The judge wrote, "There is another compelling reason not to unseal the Epstein grand jury materials at this time, namely possible threats to victims' safety and privacy." The court received a very compelling letter dated August 5th, 2025, from 3 leading victims' rights attorneys who have stated any disclosure of grand jury material, especially material that could expose or help identify victims in any way, directly affects the fairness, privacy, conferral, and protection guarantees. Leading off our discussion tonight is Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He's also a member of the Senate Finance Committee and Senate Budget Committee. He's the top-ranking Democrat on the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. Senator, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I want you to feel free to comment on, first of all, today's diversion game at Union Station, as well as the judge officially finding tonight in writing that the request for the grand jury transcripts in the Epstein case was just a diversion from the administration's previous promise to release the Epstein files.
Yeah, well, first, as to Union Station, you know, I'm sure those soldiers, those guardsmen are fine people, but they have no business doing law enforcement. They're not trained for it. They're not sworn for it. They're not authorized to do it. They're essentially props. And I think, frankly, if they were there to support D.C. law enforcement, they wouldn't be sitting out in front of Union Station like props, they'd be back at police headquarters trying to figure out what they could do useful, typing up forms, driving vehicles around, getting files organized, the kind of stuff that people who aren't law enforcement professionals could do to help with a busy police department. So it's kind of a double sham. First, it's purely a prop that's being used. And second of all, by standing around there doing nothing, they're actually not being helpful in the cause of improving law enforcement in the district when they could be made useful. So yes, to diversion there. And with respect to the judge, as you'll recall, Lawrence, this is actually the second judge to call this a diversion. And the earlier judge said that the reason you might want to actually release the grand jury material is because there was so little of it that it would potentially support the public understanding that the request to unseal the grand jury was not for the intention of transparency, but was for the intention of obfuscation and diversion. So, I mean, they've really taken a beating in court on this subject. The judge today said that the grand jury material, as you pointed out on your show, was a mere snippet of the vast file that the Department of Justice clearly has and is at liberty to disclose whenever it wishes to. So it's been a bad day at BlackRock for the Trump folks. The only other point I'd add is that obviously Pam Bondi and Kash Patel knew when they came up with this dumb idea of trying to distract everybody with a request for grand jury materials that this was going nowhere. They're either the worst lawyers in the world, or they know that this was a tiny, mere snippet of information that wasn't going to help with anything, and that it was the most protected piece of information in the entire vast files that they actually control, because it's protected by Grand Jury Secrecy Rule 6E. So when they went ahead knowing that this was going to fail just for purposes of humoring Trump and diverting a public that may not know what grand jury materials look like or how and why they're protected, or that the grand jury presentation is a tiny micro snippet of the entire file.
Yeah, we speculated, had informed speculation on this program the night Donald Trump announced his plan to try to get the grand jury transcripts, that they would not be released for exactly the reasons that the judges have refused to release them. And therefore, it would amount to Donald Trump trying to buy a couple of weeks of time, a couple of months if he was lucky, from these judges in the time it would take for them to decide it. And in the desperation that we're seeing in the diversion attempts, that seemed to be good enough for Donald Trump. He would take whatever he could get, a couple of weeks in August maybe, of judges having to decide this issue. But it seems like when the House of Representatives comes back after Labor Day, when the Senate comes back after Labor Day, this issue is still going to be going strong.
Yeah, and other judges are noticing the idea that the United States government would use the courts of the United States to create a public relations diversion. That's a pretty harsh judgment. And for judges to use that terminology indicates that they're pretty fed up. And it adds to the litany of federal judges of all different political backgrounds condemning the Trump Department of Justice for misbehavior, using terms like obstructive and contempt. I mean, they are really taking a continuing beating. And as more and more judges hear each other critiquing the administration in ways that really no previous Department of Justice has ever been critiqued by federal judges before, that begins to create, I think, more of a groundswell of judges understanding that it's not just in their courtroom that these shenanigans are going on. It's everywhere these Trump lawyers turn up. And so I think it's going to get worse rather than better for them in front of these United States district judges who are not used to being lied to, who are used to being treated with respect and not tweaked and played games with, particularly not diversion games for purposes of confusing the public.
Senator, please stay with us. We have to squeeze in a commercial break right here. And when we come back, we want to go talk about more of what's happening inside the Trump Justice Department and how Pam Bondi is running it. We'll be right back with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse.